The Galactic Tribunal was the most powerful force in the known universe, a council of ancient alien civilizations that had ruled the stars for millennia. They were the ultimate authority, the enforcers of peace, and the keepers of order. Every species that reached a certain level of power had two choices: submit to the tribunal's rule or be crushed under its might. No one had ever dared to challenge them for long. Those who resisted were erased from history, their planets reduced to lifeless husks as a warning to others. And yet, despite their unmatched power, a new species had emerged, one that defied expectations and shattered the tribunal's predictions. They called themselves humans. At first, they were dismissed as insignificant, a minor civilization from the far reaches of the galaxy. But in just a few short decades, humanity had expanded at an alarming rate, colonizing worlds faster than any species before them. Where others struggled to adapt to new environments, humans thrived. Where others followed rules and traditions, humans created their own. They did not beg for acceptance. They did not ask for permission. They simply took their place among the stars. What truly unsettled the tribunal, however, was humanity's ability to fight. Unlike other young races, humans did not fear war. When a tribunal fleet attempted to enforce control over a disputed sector, they expected an easy victory. Instead, they found themselves facing a force unlike any they had encountered. Human ships were not the most advanced, nor were they the largest, but they were fast, adaptable, and relentless. They didn't fight for territory or conquest, they fought for survival. And they won. Again and again. The tribunal was left stunned. No species had ever defied them like this. Even worse, reports indicated that human soldiers were willing to sacrifice themselves if it meant victory. They were unpredictable, resourceful, and, above all, dangerous. The tribunal had seen enough. This could not be allowed to continue. They prepared for an overwhelming assault, one that would remind humanity of its place. Fleets were mobilized, weapons powered up, and strategies devised. The tribunal expected humanity to either flee or surrender. Instead, they received a message that no one had anticipated. We request negotiations. The chamber fell silent as the message was played before the gathered alien leaders. Never before had an enemy requested peace after proving their strength. Civilizations only asked for negotiations when they were on the verge of defeat. But humans? They had won their battles. They had driven back the tribunal's forces. And now, instead of pressing their advantage, they wanted to talk. The very idea was absurd. The Exilaf, a species of warlords who had conquered dozens of worlds before joining the tribunal, were the first to react. Their leader, Supreme Commander Quran, slammed his clawed hand against the stone table, his voice a low growl. This is a trick. They have no reason to negotiate unless they are hiding something. Others murmured in agreement. It made no sense. Why would a species that had just demonstrated its ability to resist ask for peace? The Vraxis, a highly logical and calculating species, studied the data in silence before speaking. Humans are not behaving like any species before them. We assumed they would follow the patterns of war and conquest, yet they do not. Perhaps we are looking at this the wrong way. The Thalzir, the oldest species in the tribunal, known for their wisdom and patience, finally spoke. Their elder, a being who had lived for over 1,000,000 years, tapped his fingers together in deep thought. The question is not why they wish to negotiate, he said slowly, but what they know that we do not. The words sent a ripple of unease through the chamber. What if humans had discovered something? What if they weren't asking for negotiations because they were weak, but because they had seen something worse? The tribunal had always believed themselves to be the rulers of the galaxy, the ultimate force that no one could oppose. But humanity was proving to be unpredictable in ways they had never considered. If they had knowledge of a threat beyond the tribunal's reach, it could change everything. A decision had to be made. The tribunal had always ruled with an iron fist, and negotiating with an upstart species was unheard of. But humanity had already broken every rule of war, every expectation, every assumption. Ignoring them could be a mistake. After long deliberation, the tribunal reached a reluctant conclusion. They would agree to the meeting. Not because they feared humanity, but because, for the first time in centuries, they were unsure of what would happen next. The Galactic Tribunal, the most powerful force in the galaxy, was about to sit across from the most unpredictable species they had ever encountered. And somewhere deep within the void, something watched in silence, waiting for the moment when the true battle would begin. The Galactic Tribunal had ruled the stars for thousands of years, their power unquestioned, their authority absolute. No species had ever defied them and survived. But now, for the first time in history, they faced an enemy they did not understand. Humans. A species that did not beg for mercy, did not surrender, and most baffling of all, did not demand conquest. Instead, they had asked for negotiations. It was an idea so foreign to the tribunal that many of its members refused to believe it was real. The Exalath warlords, towering reptilian creatures with centuries of battle experience, saw it as an insult. Supreme Commander Karan, his sharp fangs glinting under the council chamber's dim light, clenched his clawed fists and snarled. We should have crushed them the moment they resisted. Now they dare to speak to us as equals? His voice echoed through the massive chamber, filled with the most powerful leaders of the known galaxy. The other warlike species murmured in agreement. To them, war was simple: either a species submitted or it was destroyed. There was no middle ground. But humanity was rewriting the rules. The Vrax's delegation, cold and logical beings who relied on data and probability, did not react to the outburst. Instead, their lead strategist, a translucent-skinned entity known as Advisor Exiron, activated a holographic display. Streams of battle reports, intercepted transmissions, and human military movements filled the air. We underestimated them, Xiron admitted, their voice unnervingly calm. Humans do not fight like other species. They do not rely on superior technology or brute strength. They adapt. They change strategies mid-battle. They turn losses into victories through sheer unpredictability. The room fell silent as the implications settled in. Every species that had ever risen against the tribunal had followed a pattern. They would grow powerful, challenge the tribunal's rule, and then be swiftly crushed. But humanity had done something different. They had won battles they should have lost. They had pushed back fleets that outnumbered them. And now, after proving their strength, they were offering peace. It made no sense. The Thalzir, an ancient and highly intelligent race, had remained silent throughout the meeting. Their elder, a being who had lived longer than most civilizations, finally spoke. His voice was slow, deliberate, carrying the weight of 1,000,000 years of experience. "This is not weakness," he said, his glowing eyes scanning the room. "It is something else. A warning, perhaps." The other council members turned toward him. Corin growled. "A warning? We are the tribunal. They should be the ones afraid, not us." The Thalzir elder shook his head. "You do not understand. They could have continued fighting. They could have escalated the war. But they have chosen to negotiate instead. Why? What do they know that we do not?" The question sent a chill through the room. The tribunal had always believed itself to be the dominant power in the galaxy. No force had ever truly challenged them. But what if humanity had discovered something? What if their request for negotiations wasn't a sign of surrender, but a sign of something far worse? Advisor Exiron expanded the holographic display, showing intercepted human transmissions. Some were coded, others incomplete, but one phrase kept appearing in different reports. A name. A warning. Something beyond the tribunal's reach. The Vrax's strategist turned to the council. "We assumed humanity was the enemy. But what if they are running from something greater? What if they are not just fighting for power, but for survival?" A heavy silence filled the chamber. The idea was terrifying. The tribunal had never considered the possibility that something stronger than them could exist. For thousands of years, they had believed they were at the top of the chain. But now, as they studied the human transmissions, as they replayed the desperate urgency in their messages, a cold realization settled in. Humans were not afraid of the tribunal. They had faced war before. They had survived worse. But whatever they had discovered, whatever they were preparing for, was something that even they feared. The council members exchanged uneasy glances. Koran's rage had faded into deep contemplation. The Thalzir elder watched the shifting expressions of his fellow leaders and spoke once more. If we refuse their request, we may never know the truth until it is too late. Another long silence. Then, slowly, the Vrax's advisor nodded. Perhaps, for the first time in history, the tribunal must listen rather than command. A decision had to be made. The tribunal could ignore humanity's offer and prepare for total war, or they could take a different path, one that had never been taken before. The fate of the galaxy rested on their choice. And deep in the shadows of space, something unseen was waiting, watching, preparing. The true war had not yet begun. The tribunal's decision was made. For the first time in history, they had agreed to negotiations with an outsider species, not as conquerors, not as rulers, but as equals. It was an outcome that unsettled many within the council, but the unknown threat lingering in the shadows of space had forced their hand. The location was chosen carefully, a derelict space station, abandoned long ago, floating in the vast emptiness between human and tribunal-controlled space. No civilization had laid claim to it. Now, it would become the site of a meeting that could change the fate of the galaxy. Tribunal warships arrived first, surrounding the station with a silent show of force. Massive vessels, each one capable of wiping out entire fleets, hovered in formation, their weapons locked onto the empty docking bay. Then came the humans. Their fleet was smaller, less imposing, but it moved with precision. Their ships did not bristle with unnecessary weaponry. Instead, they radiated an aura of quiet confidence, as if they had no need to impress anyone. The contrast was impossible to ignore. The tribunal sought to intimidate. The humans? They simply arrived. Inside the station, the meeting chamber had been restored just enough to function. The walls were dark, the lighting dim, and the air carried the scent of metal and age. The tribunal delegation entered first, a mix of warlords, strategists, and diplomats from the most powerful species in the galaxy. They took their seats on one side of the long table, their gazes cold and unreadable. Every movement, every glance, was calculated to remind the humans of their place. Then, the humans stepped in. There were only 3 of them. No guards. No heavily armored soldiers. Just 3 representatives in simple uniforms. At their center was Ambassador Elias Carter, a man whose expression betrayed no fear, no arrogance, only calm resolve. He walked forward with the ease of someone who belonged there, who had no doubt that this meeting was necessary. As he took his seat, he looked directly at the tribunal's lead negotiator, a towering Vrax's official named Extinction, and smiled. "Shall we begin?" The silence that followed was thick with tension. The aliens had expected humans to be defensive, to come in with desperation in their eyes, to beg for peace. Instead, they sat like equals, unfazed by the presence of beings who had crushed empires before them. Siren leaned forward, his glowing blue eyes studying Carter carefully. "You fight well," he said finally, his voice sharp. "That is rare among young species." Carter nodded. "We fight when we have to. But we did not come here to fight." He placed a small device on the table and activated it. A holographic projection flickered to life, displaying a map of the galaxy. Certain regions were marked with red unexplored. Not because they were unreachable, but because something was there. Something that no one, not even the tribunal, had dared to investigate. Carter's voice remained steady. "We have intercepted transmissions. Not ours. Not yours. Something else." He tapped the device, and a chilling sound filled the room, a fragmented transmission, layered with static, but beneath it, something was speaking. A voice in a language none of them recognized, whispering in the void. The sound sent a shiver through the tribunal members. Koran, the Exelith warlord, narrowed his reptilian eyes. "What are we listening to?" Carter's expression darkened. "A warning. From a species that no longer exists." He let the words sink in before continuing. "We studied the patterns. Whatever sent this message was wiped Out completely. And they were more advanced than either of us. Another tap on the device. More data appeared: ruined planets, traces of battles that had left no survivors, remnants of civilizations erased from existence without a trace of their conquerors. Carter's voice was calm, but his eyes were sharp. This is why we are here. We are not offering peace because we are weak. We are offering it because war with each other is a distraction from the real threat. The tribunal leaders exchanged wary glances. They had never considered the possibility that something stronger than them could exist. They had ruled unchallenged for so long that they had become blind to what lay beyond their borders. Zyron exhaled slowly, his expression unreadable. And you believe that if we join forces, we can survive this unknown enemy? Carter didn't hesitate. Alone, we fall. Together, we stand a chance. The room fell into another silence, heavier than before. The tribunal had spent centuries crushing opposition, dictating the fate of lesser species. But now, they faced a decision unlike any other. Koran, ever the warrior, gritted his teeth. And if we refuse? Carter didn't flinch. Then we both die. He leaned forward, his gaze unwavering. This is not about control, not about power. This is about survival. The tribunal had thought they were the ones in control of this meeting. But now, as they sat in silence, processing the weight of humanity's warning, it became clear the future of the galaxy was no longer in their hands alone. The meeting had ended, but the tension still hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. The tribunal leaders had left the station without giving a clear answer, their expressions filled with unease. The humans had planted a seed of doubt in their minds, a fear they could not ignore. But whether they would accept the truth or choose to bury it remained uncertain. As the last of the tribunal warships vanished into the darkness of space, Ambassador Elias Carter stood alone in the dimly lit chamber, his eyes fixed on the holographic display still hovering above the table. The image of the destroyed civilizations flickered before him, remnants of a past no one wanted to acknowledge. He let out a slow breath. "They don't want to believe it," he muttered. Behind him, Commander Sarah Hayes, one of the military observers assigned to the mission, stepped forward. "Can you blame them?" she said. "The tribunal has ruled the galaxy for centuries. They see themselves as invincible. Now we're telling them that something out there is stronger than them? It goes against everything they believe." Carter nodded. But belief doesn't change reality. He tapped the display, zooming in on one of the red-marked regions, the dead zones, where entire civilizations had vanished. "We intercepted their classified data. They knew something was wrong long before we arrived. They just chose to ignore it." Hayes frowned, crossing her arms. "How much do they know?" Carter hesitated, then turned to face her. "More than they admitted, and less than they need to." The truth was buried deep, hidden beneath layers of secrecy, but the evidence was undeniable. The tribunal had encountered something in the far reaches of space, something they had not been able to defeat. The records were fragmented, but what little data they had pieced together painted a terrifying picture. It started with small disappearances, ships lost without explanation, outposts that stopped responding, then entire worlds silent, lifeless, stripped of all existence. And the most disturbing part? There were no signs of battle, no wreckage, no bodies, just emptiness. Whatever was out there didn't wage war in the traditional sense. It didn't conquer, it erased. Hayes studied the data, her expression tightening. And they still refused to acknowledge it? Carter exhaled sharply. Because acknowledging it would mean accepting that they are no longer in control. The tribunal had built its power on dominance, on the idea that no force in the galaxy could challenge them. But now, that illusion was crumbling, and they were terrified. Hayes clenched her fists. "So what do we do now?" "Sit and wait while they argue over whether or not to act." Carter's gaze darkened. "No. We prepare, with or without them." He reached for a small, secured datapad and entered a restricted code. A new projection replaced the previous one, a blueprint of Project Aegis, humanity's secret contingency plan. While the tribunal debated, Earth's military had already started making its own moves. Fleets were being reinforced. Defensive stations were being constructed at key points along the outer colonies. Weapons were being developed to combat an enemy they still didn't fully understand. It was a gamble, but humanity had learned one harsh truth long ago. Survival favors those who act, not those who hesitate. Hayes studied the projection, her voice quieter now. And what if the tribunal refuses to stand with us? Carter's expression didn't change. Then we stand alone. There was no fear in his voice. No doubt. Just certainty. He had seen what was coming, and he knew what had to be done. The tribunal could bury their heads in the sand if they wanted, but humanity would not. Because out there, in the dark corners of the galaxy, something was waiting. And when it finally revealed itself, those who had ignored the warning would learn the truth the hard way. But by then, it might already be too late. The tribunal's grand chamber was silent, a rare occurrence in a place where power was measured by the volume of one's voice. The leaders of the most dominant species in the galaxy sat in their towering seats, their expressions unreadable, their thoughts hidden behind centuries of political cunning. The decision before them was unlike any they had ever faced. This was not about war, territory, or control. This was about survival. At the center of the vast chamber stood Ambassador Elias Carter, the lone human representative, his face calm despite the storm surrounding him. His words from the last meeting still echoed in their minds. Alone, we fall. Together, we stand a chance. For centuries, the tribunal had ruled without challenge. Their fleets crushed rebellions before they could begin. Their laws dictated the fates of entire species. But now, something had changed. Something stronger had arrived. The mysterious force lurking in the dead zones was real, and the tribunal knew it. They had known for a long time, but had done what rulers often do when faced with the unknown. They ignored it. But now, humanity had forced the truth into the light. Carter had shown them the recordings, the lost transmissions, the ruined civilizations erased without a trace. He had spoken the words they refused to say aloud. You are not the strongest anymore. Zyron, the tribunal's chief negotiator, leaned forward, his glowing blue eyes locked onto Carter. You ask us to stand with you. But tell me, human, why should we trust you? His voice was smooth, practiced, filled with the weight of a leader who had shaped history. You are a young species. Reckless. Unpredictable. You fight wars even when you do not need to. How do we know that this is not some trick? That humanity does not seek to rise as the new rulers of the galaxy? Carter didn't flinch. If we wanted war, we would not have come to you. We would have prepared in silence, waited until you were too weak to resist. But that is not what we want. We are not offering an alliance out of fear. We are offering it because it is the only logical path forward. He took a step closer, his voice firm. This enemy will not care for your fleets, your power, your history. It will not negotiate. It will not warn you before it strikes. It will simply erase you, the same way it has erased others before. The chamber remained silent, but beneath the stillness, there was unease. The tribunal leaders exchanged glances, their confidence shaken. They had ruled with strength, but now, for the first time, strength was not enough. Koran, the Exceleth warlord, let out a low growl. And if we refuse? If we choose to stand alone, as we always have? Carter's expression did not change. Then you will fall alone. There was no threat in his voice, no arrogance, only certainty. We will not wait for your decision to act. We are already preparing. Humanity will stand whether you stand with us or not. Zyron narrowed his eyes. He had spent his life bending lesser species to his will. But this human, this Carter, would not break. He saw no fear in his eyes, only the determination of a species that had survived against impossible odds, a species that did not wait for permission to shape its own fate. For the first time in centuries, the tribunal had no control over the future. The decision they made today would not just shape the balance of power, it would decide whether they survived at all. Siren exhaled slowly, then turned to the rest of the council. The vote must be cast. One by one, the leaders of the tribunal spoke. Some argued that humanity was too dangerous, too unpredictable. Others admitted with great reluctance that the evidence was undeniable.